Good evening, Little Masters, and welcome to episode 369 of the Prancing Pony Podcast, where, concerning the beginning of the podcast, strange tales are told both by the Eldar and by the Dwarves.
Well, fortunately, those things lie far back behind our days, so let's say little of them here.
Deal.
Folks, pull up a bench in the common room and join us. I'm Sara, the Shieldmaiden of Rohan, and I'm here with the Man of the West, who will have to live a lot longer to be known far and wide as Alan the Deathless. Alan Sisto.
Alan the Deathless. Let's just say that if an heir is born in my house so like to me that he gets my name, all I can really say is, I'm so sorry. Really. Folks, join us as we begin a 5-episode look just a little closer to the ground at the Dwarves, starting with the story of Durin's folk found in Appendix A.
Now, being myself a little closer to the ground also, I'm feeling quite comfortable with this topic.
All right.
Now, folks, no matter how you arrived, you're all welcome here in the common room. At the Prancing Pony Podcast, we are reading and talking our way through Middle-earth with plenty of speculation and some truly terrible joking along the way.
Mm-hmm. And we do love our deep dives into the lore, though, discussing our favorite themes and a whole lot more.
But we do try to keep it light and fun, just like a couple of friends chatting at the pub. And we're glad you've joined us.
I'm sure you'll be glad you joined as well. But before we get to tonight's chapter discussion, it's time for fan favorite Philology Fair. So in tonight's episode, we're going to read about how Thráin arrives in Erebor, becomes the king under the mountain, and finds the great jewel, the Arkenstone, heart of the mountain. Going back to the Hobbit, we read that it was like a globe with 1,000 facets. It shone like silver in the firelight, like water in the sun, like snow under the stars, like rain upon the moon.
Now, later when Bilbo finds it, we read, it was the Arkenstone, the heart of the mountain. So Bilbo guessed from Thorin's description, but indeed there could not be two such gems, even in so marvellous a hoard, even in all the world. Ever as he climbed, the same white gleam had shone before him and drawn his feet towards it. Slowly it grew to a little globe of pallid light. Now as he came near, it was tinged with a flickering sparkle of many colours at the surface, reflected and splintered from the wavering light of his torch. At last he looked down upon it, and he caught his breath. The great jewel shone before his feet of its own inner light, and yet, cut and fashioned by the dwarves, who had dug it from the heart of the mountain long ago, it took all light that fell upon it and changed it into 10,000 sparks of white radiance shot with glints of the rainbow.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Gorgeous. And some of that description, especially the idea that it shone of its own inner light, have led folks to ask, is the Arkenstone a Silmaril? Specifically, the one that accompanied Maethros as he hurled himself into a fiery chasm.
That's right. And that question is closely tied to the word nerdery behind Arkenstone, which is the whole point of a Philology Fair, and which I am finally getting to, I promise. So if we go to the Ring of Words, which we've looked at a number of times on the show, we read that the name of the Arkenstone is one of many extinct Old English words which Tolkien revived, though he did not simply lift Old English words from their context, but fitted them into their new surroundings by giving them modernized spellings.
Yeah, and of course he didn't stop there, did he? No. He would ensure these modern spellings, quote, reflect the patterns of change and pronunciation which can be seen in those words which did survive into modern English, so that they have linguistic authenticity, representing the spellings that the extinct words would have had if they had survived in continuous use through the centuries.
Because of course that's what Tolkien would do.
Exactly.
I mean, linguistic authenticity is at the core of everything he did. So what is the Old English word that Tolkien used as the basis for the modern English word Arkenstone? Well, that word was Eorknanstan, meaning precious stone. The Orknan part is what means precious, and stan, not surprisingly, is stone. The authors of the Ring of Words actually point to a 10th century manuscript known as the Rushworth Gospels, where Eorknanstan is used in the biblical instruction to not cast your pearls before swine, where Eorknanstan, precious stone, represents pearls. It's very interesting. Now, the Ring of Words goes on to explain the transition to the modernized form Arkenstone by comparing it to a word that has survived into modern English, the word hearken. like hearken to me, right? They say that Tolkien rather liked the spelling hearken without that first E, so Harken, which the Oxford English Dictionary says is more regular and of earlier standing. Now, that word hearken without the E, just like the arcan part of the Arkenstone, comes from Old English heorknian, and the Ring of Words explains that the last three letters, the IAN, that Ian suffix, are an inflectional ending that regularly disappears before modern times, just as the same ending, the AN ending of Eorknan would have done. The Aor to R transition is also a regular transition from Old English to Modern English, and so Eorknanstan becomes Arkenstone.
Ooh, fantastic stuff.
Isn't it? It's just amazing.
And where this gets especially interesting is that at the time that Tolkien was writing The Hobbit, early to mid-1930s, he was also working on an Old English version of the Annals of Valinor. Mm-hmm. It's in The Shaping of Middle-earth, which is volume 4 of the History of Middle-earth. And while there's not a lot there is one thing we discover. The Silmarils are Eorklanstanas, leading the authors of the Ring of Words to conclude that, quote, although the Arkenstone has no obvious link to the wider history or mythology of Middle-earth, its name does make a hidden connection with the tales of the elder days.
That is correct. And in the History of the Hobbit, John Ratliff suggests that Tolkien wanted to make this hidden connection, but that the connection does not establish that they're the same jewel. And I'm absolutely 100% on board with him on this. I love the way he puts this, and Sean and I talked about this all the way back in episode 43 of the PPP in season 1. Ratliff writes, by avoiding the use of the word Silmaril and instead using the ingenious and agreeable synonym Arkenstone, Eorknanstan, Tolkien got to draw on his rich homebrew mythology, which by the early 1930s had developed a remarkable depth and sophistication without worrying what the effect of his new story would be on that mythology.
So, in other words, Tolkien was using his own rich homebrew mythology as a source of inspiration. Mm-hmm. Yep, sort of like how the king of the woodland realm in The Hobbit is quite clearly modelled after Thingol in the First Age. So, well, the Arkenstone isn't a Silmaril, but the Silmarils certainly inspired it.
Yeah, certainly. Ooh. At least in terms of name, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I love the way he went about developing the change in the name so that it fits in modern English from an Old English word. Like he could point to the etymology of Arkenstone as though it were real.
Yes. Yeah, it's beautifully done, isn't it? He's such a word nerd. And you've got to love how he's done this. It's not just the name, though, that kind of connects with the Silmaril. I mean, look at the description of the jewel.
Shining with its own light is the thing that first grabs your eye. Like, wait a minute, that's pretty amazing. That sounds like a Silmaril.
Yes, it does. And it's not just shining with its own light, but with a light that is absolutely beautiful.
Yes.
So, it shines like silver in the firelight, like water in the sun, like snow under the stars, like rain upon the moon.
That's beautiful. Snow under the stars is one of the most amazing things to see. And it's glittering, it's glowing. The passage you read talking about the white radiance shot with glints of the rainbow. This is just fantastic, and it really does put you in mind of the description of the Silmarils. There is one line in that passage, the one that you read, that for me at least sort of solidifies the fact that it is not, and it's the fact that it was cut and fashioned by the dwarves.
Yes.
Because nothing on earth could have cut or fashioned the Silmaril beyond, the way it was crafted by Feanor. But plus, of course, they would have had to do that with like robot arms and such, because they are definitely of mortal flesh and would not have survived the hallowing as Baron did. But it is just an interesting question. It's a really valid question.
It is. You can see why people would ask it.
100%. And how appealing would it be in a story perspective to think that this is the same one that Maedhros threw into, the hole in the ground along with himself. But then you also think about just how far that would have been, because that would have been, on far west end of Beleriand before the destruction of that part of the continent. And to find it in Erebor just doesn't make much sense.
Yeah. The other connection that's fascinating, though, is the response of people to a Silmaril or to the Arkenstone.
Yes.
So, of course, you've got Feanor and his sons who are all like, Silmarils, and we will make ill-advised vows and do all this and that, and people die because of the Silmarils, and everything is about recovering the Silmarils. Think about Thráin and how he responds to the Arkenstone. The Arkenstone is mine. It is mine. You may not take it. I don't care what else is in here. The Arkenstone belongs to me. It's a similar kind of greed for a particular thing. I think it's just a fascinating little extra that tells you that, yes, the Arkenstone is not a Silmaril, but it's having a really similar effect on someone who believes it belongs to him and no one else.
It really does.
Right, well, that was a fascinating bit of word nerdery, Alan, but how about we start with the first reading?
I think we should. And we're moving on to the dwarves now. It's a very big shift from Aragorn and Arwen. They're a little bit shorter. Appendix A III, Durin's Folk. Concerning the beginning of the dwarves, strange tales are told both by the Eldar and by the dwarves themselves. But since these things lie far back beyond our days, little is said of them here. Durin is the name that the dwarves used for the eldest of the 7 fathers of their race, and the ancestor of all the kings of the Longbeards. He slept alone, until in the deeps of time and the awakening of that people, he came to Azanulbizar, and in the caves above Keled Zaram in the east of the Misty Mountains he made his dwelling, where afterwards were the mines of Moria, renowned in song. There he lived so long that he was known far and wide as Durin the Deathless. Yet in the end he died before the elder days had passed, and his tomb was in Khazad-dûm. But his line never failed, and 5 times an heir was born in his house, so like to his forefather, that he received the name of Durin. He was indeed held by the dwarves to be the Deathless that returned, for they have many strange tales and beliefs concerning themselves and their fate in the world. After the end of the First Age, the power and wealth of Khazad-dûm was much increased, for it was enriched by many people and much lore and craft when the ancient cities of Nogrod and Belagost in the Blue Mountains were ruined at the breaking of Thangorodrim. The power of Moria endured throughout the dark years and the dominion of Sauron, for though Eregion was destroyed and the gates of Moria were shut, the halls of Khazad-dûm were too deep and strong and filled with a people too numerous and valiant for Sauron to conquer from without. Thus its wealth remained long unravished, though its people began to dwindle. It came to pass that in the middle of the Third Age, Durin was again its king, being the 6th of that name. The power of Sauron, servant of Morgoth, was then again growing in the world, though the shadow in the forest that looked towards Moria was not yet known for what it was. All evil things were stirring. The dwarves delved deep at that time, seeking beneath Barazinbar for mithril, the metal beyond price that was becoming yearly ever harder to win. Thus they roused from sleep a thing of terror that, flying from Thangorodrim, had lain hidden at the foundations of the earth since the coming of the host of the west, a Balrog of Morgoth. Durin was slain by it, and the year after, Nain the First, his son, and then the glory of Moria passed, and its people were destroyed or fled far away.
Wonderful. What a great start.
Isn't it? It really is, yeah. It covers a big span of time, but it does it in such an engaging way that you're immediately stuck into this story.
Yes, absolutely. It's just one of those things about how the appendices are so well worth diving into because they have so much to tell us.
Mm-hmm. So many stories, yes.
Yes, absolutely. So for this, we begin with a vague mention of the beginnings of the dwarves and how there are differing tales of their origins. Oh, you are not kidding. If you go to the peoples of Middle-earth, you will see that. And while the text says little is said of them here, we'd be doing you a disservice, the kind we would never wish to do you if we didn't at least do a quick review. All of that rhymed, Alan.
Indeed, and wonderful rhyming. And I mean it. Anybody want a peanut? In the Legendarium, we learn most about the origin of dwarves in the chapter of Ale and Yavanna in the Silmarillion. Essentially, Ale created them because he was impatient for the children of Iluvatar to come along. He wanted people to love and to teach, and he made them strong and resilient because of the threats in Middle-earth at the time.
Now, Ilúvatar confronted him, since Aule lacked the authority and the ability to create sentient beings, and Aule repented and offered to destroy his children. Ilúvatar stopped him, gave the dwarves actual life, but then put them to sleep until after the awakening of the elves. And the stories about the dwarves, including the appendix we're about to look at, focus on the line of Durin, the father of the Longbeards, who slept alone under Mount Gundabad at the north end of the Misty Mountains. But we learn a little bit about the other 6 fathers of the dwarves in the peoples of Middle-earth, of dwarves and men.
That's right. And we're going to cover a lot more of that in a couple of episodes.
Yep.
For now, we're just going to mention that 2 of the other fathers of the dwarves were put to rest in the Eredluin. They're the ones that founded the lines of the Broadbeams and the Firebeards of Nogrod and Belagost. The other 4 were in 2 pairs out in Rune, and they founded lines called the Iron Fists, Stiff Beards, Blacklocks, and Stonefoots.
Now, the elves, it is said, believed that when dwarves died, they returned to the earth and the stone of which they were made. Well, dwarves believe Aule sets their souls apart and they will serve him in rebuilding Arda after the last battle. So there's at least one of the differences in the strange tales told by the Eldar and the dwarves.
Exactly. Now, that was really the TLDR version. We tried to give you a very compressed, sort of brief overview, because we're definitely going to be getting into some of those strange tales the dwarves have about their own history as we cover the dwarves over the next 5 episodes. But we're going to move on for now. The text, after glossing over their origin, moves directly to Durin, as it should. I mean, after all, this is the appendix on Durin's folk.
Right. He's said to be the oldest of the 7 fathers, therefore the first of the dwarves. Mm-hmm. And this is where we get the mention of his line, the Longbeards.
Yes. And there's an interesting side note here, because Douglas A. Anderson in the annotated Hobbit says that in calling the dwarves Longbeards, Tolkien is probably recalling the Lombards. Longbeards is Old English Longbearden, Germanic people known for their ferocity.
And though we know he slept alone under Mount Gundabad from that same essay of Dwarves and Men, the text here tells us where he ended up after he woke up, which is Azanulbizar, and that's the Kuzdul name for the valley, also known as the Dimril Dale.
Right. Now, that's the one that's on the east side of the Misty Mountains. I know that for folks whose primary experience of the dwarves is The Lord of the Rings, we think of the Gate of Moria as the doors of Durin on the west side. That's not where Durin entered Moria. He entered it from the east side in the valley known as the Dimril Dale or Azanulbizar. That valley is the source of the Silverlode, and it's also home to the Mirror. Speaking of the Mirror, that's the common speech name for what is referred to here as Kered Zaram.
Right. Now, Durin ends up getting to be old enough that he's called Durin the Deathless. But how old was he really? It's kind of hard to tell.
Yeah, good luck with that. Yeah.
Yeah. We know the dwarves awoke after the elves, but when was that?
Well, in a couple of places in the history of Middle-earth, specifically the Annals of Aman in Morgoth's Ring and the Grey Annals in the War of the Jewels, we learned that the elves awoke in the year of the trees 1050. So sometime after that.
Yeah, but how much later? So if we go to the chapter of the Sindar in the Silmarillion, we learn that the Sindar first encountered the dwarves in Year of the Trees 1250. So that's a 200-year gap. Or more like a 1900-year gap, because the years of the trees are so long.
That's right. It's 200 years of the trees, so it's almost 2,000 actual solar years. Now, can we narrow that gap down a little further? We actually can. In the War of the Jewels, in a bit called Concerning the Dwarves, Christopher points us to a roughly written passage in which we're told about Aule's creation of the dwarves. And as in the published version, we read that he took the 7 fathers, laid them in far sundered places. Again, Durin by himself. But then we get this tidbit. It is not known when Durin or his brethren first awoke, though some think that it was at the time of the departure of the Eldar overseas. So now we have a historical moment to compare it to.
Right, and that means it was between Year of the Trees 1132, when the Vanyar and the Noldor headed over, and 1150, which is when the Teleri left.
And that's a lot smaller gap. I mean, yes, it's still quite a bit, about 140-year gap, because those are still years of the trees, but it narrows it down quite a bit. Again, though, that's only if, the some think right? This is another one of these
Some
say
say.
Moments. Yeah.
Yeah.
So only if that's right. Now, the text here does tell us that he died before the Elder Days were over. Now, you and I just talked last week about the Elder Days because Aragorn says, I am the latest king of the Elder Days.
Right.
And it could possibly just be referring to the Third Age because First, Second, and Third Age were called Elder Days in the Fourth Age. Here, though, this is clearly referring to the formal meaning of the word, which means just before the overthrow of Thangorodrim.
Exactly. Yeah. So all told then, Durin the Deathless was most likely around 2,400 years old by the time of his death.
That's fair enough to call him the Deathless then.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Yeah, even though he died, his line never failed. But not every descendant was a Durin. I think that's very interesting. It's not like his son was Durin the Second. But 5 more times over the history of the dwarves, we're told, an heir was born that was so like Durin that he was actually named after him.
And the dwarves actually believed that he was Durin returned, reincarnated.
Oh, we got to talk
questions.
About that. Yeah, I do too. And I mean, I'm hoping that when we do the episode covering the stuff in Peoples of Middle-earth, we'll get a lot more on that. But that's an interesting belief. Like, did we borrow that from the elves and the whole idea of Fëanor and new bodies and all of that?
Yeah, I mean, since when do the dwarves believe in reincarnation? That's a really odd thing.
And they seem to only believe in it for Durin, or maybe the fathers of the other houses.
Only for Durin. And my other question is, look at what it says, that an heir is born that's so like Durin that he's named after him. How do you know when little itty-bitty dwarf is born? I mean, does he come out with a ginormic beard?
Does he get named? Is it like the elves where they're not really given their kind of true names, the names that they're known by until they're grown?
That would make more sense.
And even then, even if you have, let's say, sculptures of Durin, they're not going to be like photographic evidence.
Not so much. So how do they know?
How do they know that he's even like him? Nobody remembers the last Durin because it's been hundreds of years. It's a very interesting question. Like, how do we know?
Right. So maybe it is something like the dwarf has to grow into that name, if you like. And it would be, I hate to think that all it is some kind of facial similarity, because I don't think that really works. It's got to be something about the personality, the charisma, the way in which they are with others, something about just the way they carry themselves even. But you can't tell that when it's a sproglet that's just popped out.
No, you can't. And I think, again, I'm hoping we get to this when we get to Peoples of Middle-earth, about how dwarves get named. And we get so much detail on elvish names in the history of Middle-earth. We get how the mother gives them a name, the father gives them a name, then they get given a name later on when they're older and they've grown into their character. And that makes me feel like, okay, if that's the way they choose, if they've borrowed that, let's say, from the elves, that method of naming, then maybe that's when the Durin name is given to an heir. Like, wow, now that you've grown up, you really strike me as a lot like Durin. Not that you look like him, but that you act like him. You have that same leadership or that same charisma, that same wisdom, whatever it may be. Right.
Yeah.
And so you're going to be given the name Durin the Fourth, and yet not every heir got it. That's the thing. It was a very uncommon thing for an heir of Durin to actually be a Durin. So,
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll have to wait and see what the Peoples of Middle-earth has to say about this.
Yes, we will. So come back in a couple of weeks for that.
Yep. So now this idea of the dwarves believing that he was Durin returned, reincarnated. This is one of those many strange tales and beliefs about themselves. So we're definitely going to be digging into that in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, we will. But after his death, 2,400 years or so, after the end of the First Age, Khazad-dûm, which was already the greatest of the mansions of the dwarves back when the Sindar first met the dwarves in the year of the trees, 1250, Khazad-dûm is said to get even more rich. And I suppose it helps when the survivors of 2 other dwarven cities, Nogrod and Belagost, find their way there when that part of the continent sinks under the waves after the destruction of Thangorodrim.
And it's not just wealth either. We also hear about much lore and craft. And now with those 2 places gone, the sole focus in the rest of the Legendarium is on Moria and Durin's people, the Longbeards. So we shift to Moria.
Indeed. And they managed to do all right during the time of Sauron's power in the Second Age, even after Sauron wiped out Eregion and made that Celebrimbor kebab.
Well, sure, they had to close the doors and isolate, but there was zero chance Sauron would have been able to beat them from the outside.
From the outside. Was that supposed to be foreboding? Because it sounds foreboding, right? Too
It does.
strong for Sauron to conquer from without suggests a rather different approach, maybe one with shadowy wings. That isolation had a cost, though, didn't it? Right? I mean, its people began to dwindle. And again, we'll probably get to things on dwarven reproduction in a couple of episodes. But clearly they weren't achieving the replacement birth rate of 2 kids per couple, you know?
No, they were not. No. So we now move forward to the middle of the Third Age, and now we've got Durin the Sixth ruling over Khazad-dûm.
Mm-hmm.
Sauron is regaining his strength in Mirkwood, but no one is aware that it's him just yet.
Mm-hmm.
But evil things are stirring as a result. Now the text moves quickly, but we'll slow down just a bit.
Just a bit, though. First, we're told they're digging deep for a valuable metal called mithril that every year is getting harder and harder to find. I want to revisit Gandalf's words about that from The Lord of the Rings. The wealth of Moria was not in gold and jewels, the toys of the dwarves, nor in iron their servant. Such things they found here, it is true, especially iron, but they did not need to delve for them. All things that they desired they could obtain in traffic. For here alone in the world was found Moria silver, or true silver, as some have called it. Mithril is the elvish name. The dwarves have a name which they do not tell. Its worth was 10 times that of gold, and now it is beyond price, for little is left above ground, and even the orcs dare not delve here for it.
Now, Gandalf continues explaining that, and I'm not doing an Alan Worthy reading of Gandalf's voice, but he explains that the loads lead away north towards Carathras and down to darkness. The dwarves tell no tale, but even as Mithril was the foundation of their wealth, so also it was their destruction. They delved too greedily and too deep, and disturbed that from which they fled, Durin's bane. Of what they brought to light, the orcs have gathered nearly all, and given it in tribute to Sauron, who covets it. And then we're told that they woke something up, a thing of terror. But did they wake it up? The footnote to this reads, or released from prison. It may well be that it had already been awakened by the malice of Sauron.
I like that footnote version.
So do I.
And it sort of fits. I mean, I'm thinking of the way the Witch King sort of woke up the evil spirits in the Barrow Downs.
Right, yes.
What do you think? Is it released from prison or awakened by Sauron's malice?
Well, the easy answer, isn't it? It's that the dwarves woke it up by digging too greedily and too deep, because it speaks to that kind of stereotype of dwarves that we have, that, you know, that's what they're after, and that's kind of part of their, I suppose, a flaw in their character, if you like. But I just like the idea that Sauron was working to destabilize Moria from the inside, and that he would know that there's a Balrog having a snooze in the bottom, and that he would find a way to wake it up. I like that idea.
I do too. I mean, it still is connected to the dwarves and their actions, because they're the ones who still, you know, free it from prison. It's, you know, it's still trapped physically, perhaps, because as it's napped, the mountain has shifted as, you know, plate tectonics have moved things around. And so now it's sort of, it's really hidden. And the only way it can get out now is if it's released, physically released. So, yeah, I like that. That's, I guess in the end of the day, at least for this particular Durin, it doesn't really matter whether they opened its jail cell or woke it up from its nap. It's really something they would have preferred just not to encounter at all.
Right.
A Balrog of Morgoth that escaped the destruction of Thangorodrim all the way back at the end of the First Age. That was First Age 587, so it's been here for 5.5 millennia, 5,500 years it's been hiding out here.
That is quite the power nap.
It is, isn't it? I mean, I'm happy when I get 20 minutes.
Right? Lucky old Balrog. But in case you need a reminder of the Balrog, the Valaquenta gives us a bit of a description. It says, of the Maiar, many were drawn to Melkor's splendor in the days of his greatness, and remained in that allegiance down into his darkness, and others he corrupted afterwards to his service with lies and treacherous gifts. Dreadful among these spirits were the Valaraukar, the scourges of fire that in Middle-earth were called the Balrogs, demons of terror.
Now, they were man-shaped, but about twice the height of a man, so ballpark 12 feet or so, wrapped in shadow and fire, covered in smoke, wielding whips of flame.
I know where you're going.
But wings?
Yeah.
Shadowy wings. Wings of shadow. We'll go back to our episode. Sean and I did this, did a whole, recapping the entire debate on the episode in the Battle of the Bridge of Khazad-dûm, I should say.
Yes, and you did a fantastic job of picking it apart then. Now, this Balrog was so grumpy upon waking from his 5 millennia nap in Third Age 1980 that he killed Durin the Sixth. And a year later, just because, he killed the next king, Durin the Sixth's son, Thráin the First. But not surprisingly, the folks of Moria either died or they left. Well, I would.
Yeah.
I'd do a bit of a runner, that's for sure.
If I were 9, I would have left.
Yes. What was he sticking around for?
I guess anyway. They thought he was not coming back. Well, we've satisfied the Balrog with my father. So.
Yes, we fed my dad to the Balrog. Surely that'll do.
That'll suffice.
Yes, but no. The glory of Moria disappeared when the folks of Moria did.
Yeah. Well, of course, now the only resident is the Balrog, the grumpy Balrog who woke up and said, "Where are my wings?"
Could have sworn I had some.
Exactly.
Pretty lace ones with sparkles.
Now, soon we'll get back to being chased out of Moria by the Balrog, but before we do, we want to remind you there is a lot more talk going on at the Prancing Pony podcast than just us.
Yep, because the PPP has an amazing listener community. They're always coming up with great questions and discussions across all our social media spaces. Check out our common room on Facebook, our dedicated subreddit, Twitter, and more.
On Facebook, just look for the Prancing Pony podcast. Follow the page to get the news, but you're going to want to join the group for some great discussions.
On Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, Twitch, TikTok, and YouTube, we are at Prancing Pony Pod. Or if you prefer Reddit, find us there at r/Prancing Pony Pod.
And if you want daily Tolkien content, check out today's Tolkien Times on the PPP YouTube channel and on all your favorite podcast apps. It's my short format daily show with everything from Word Nerd Wednesdays to Fandom Fridays. And then there's my new twice weekly streaming of all fun things Middle-earth on the PPP Plays. Be sure to check both of those shows out on the YouTube channel for all of the PPP productions at youtube.com/@PrancingPonyPod. Now, Sara, would you pick up where I left off?
Absolutely. Most of those that escaped made their way into the north, and Thráin the First, Nine's son, came to Erebor, the lonely mountain, near the eastern eaves of Mirkwood, and there he began new works, and became king under the mountain. In Erebor he found the great jewel, the Arkenstone, heart of the mountain. But Thráin the First his son removed, and went into the far north to the Grey Mountains, where most of Durin's folk were now gathering, for those mountains were rich and little explored. But there were dragons in the wastes beyond, and after many years they became strong again and multiplied, and they made war on the dwarves and plundered their works. At last, Thráin the First, together with Fror, his second son, was slain at the doors of his hall by a great cold drake. Not long after, most of Durin's folk abandoned the Grey Mountains. Gror, Dain's son, went away with many followers to the Iron Hills, but Thror, Dain's heir, with Borin his father's brother, and the remainder of the people returned to Erebor. To the great hall of Thráin, Thror brought back the Arkenstone, and he and his folk prospered and became rich, and they had the friendship of all men that dwelt near. For they made not only things of wonder and beauty, but weapons and armour of great worth. And there was great traffic of ore between them and their kin in the Iron Hills. Thus the Northmen, who lived between Celduin, river running, and Carnen, red water, became strong and drove back all enemies from the east, and the dwarves lived in plenty, and there was feasting and song in the halls of Erebor. So the rumour of the wealth of Erebor spread abroad and reached the ears of the dragons, And at last Smaug the Golden, greatest of the dragons of his day, arose and without warning came against King Thror and descended on the mountain in flames.
He was supposed to give a written notice, a 30-day warning. King Thror, I am coming to get you.
Just failed to do that.
Yeah. So we learn that of those that escaped Moria, the majority of them headed to the north. And that seems like a pretty reasonable move, right? I mean, east is out. That's where the shadow was building. Nobody wants to go that direction.
True.
South would have had them heading towards Fangorn and Gondor. Rohan wasn't a thing yet. Wouldn't be for another 500 years. West makes sense, but they're going to be exiting the east side because at this point, why go all the way through the slightly less populated parts of Moria to get out the doors of Durin? Just go out the main gate. So really, north is where you're going.
Right, that kind of makes sense. In fact, Nine's son, the king of his people and the grandson of Durin the Sixth, leads them to Erebor, the Lonely Mountain, and establishes that kingdom in Third Age 1999. Partying like.
I know, I'm hearing princes. Yeah, my thoughts exactly.
Nearly 20 years after Durin's Bane drove out the dwarves. Sorry, I had to. I couldn't help it.
I'm totally hearing it now too. And I'm also thinking that he probably drove them to Erebor in a little red Corvette.
Oh,
and that there was probably some purple rain while they were on the road.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
Was he wearing a raspberry beret? That's what I want to know.
Almost certainly. Somebody was.
The kind you find in a secondhand store?
Mm-hmm. Well, what else? What other raspberry beret are you going to find except one in a secondhand store?
Very true.
So, to help put the establishment of this kingdom in a more familiar timeline, it's 25 years after the end of the kingdom of Arnor and the death of Arvedui. And it's just 3 years before Minas Ithil is captured and becomes Minas Morgul. So there's a lot happening in the world right now.
There really is. And not only does he become king under the mountain, he discovers the Arkenstone here. Mm-hmm. And we have already spent some time on that in today's philology fair.
Indeed, we did. Now, on the other hand, his son Thorin went a lot further north, all the way up to the Grey Mountains, where many of the other Longbeards were coming together. These mountains were rich and untapped, but there's a reason they're untapped. Dragons.
Yeah. Those dragons, having grown strong in number, they attack the dwarves, and it won't be the last time either. Now, Dain the First, whose great-grandson will share his name and feature in the story, he dies, along with his son Fror, killed by a cold drake. And this is nearly 600 years after the foundation of Erebor in 2589, and that's about 80 years after Rohan was established, just to help sort the timeline.
Mm-hmm. Now, I'd always imagined a cold drake as simply meaning a dragon who couldn't breathe fire, right? I mean, he's not hot, therefore he's quote-unquote cold. Not with some sort of special air conditioning power. And in part, that's because of this really interesting quote from Turambar and the Foloke in the Book of Lost Tales, Part 2, that the least mighty of the dragons of Morgoth, at that time he was referred to as Melko, are cold as is the nature of snakes and serpents. So, just cold-blooded.
Right, well, Tolkien adds, the mightier are hot and very heavy and slow-going, and some belch flame, and fire flickereth beneath their scales. So yeah, fire-breathing dragons, and less mighty ones that are just cold as in lacking heat.
Right, exactly. But back in episode 352, when Matt and I were talking about the House of Eorl, we talked about Fram, the dragon slayer, said to have killed Skada the worm.
Now, we don't get any clues about Skada in the text, not even that he's a cold drake, but you and Matt looked at the collected poems of J.R.R. Tolkien, right? At that time, only recently released, and you discovered a poem about Skada that Tolkien wrote in 1954.
Mm-hmm. And there it sounds like he has some pretty terrifying powers. So there, Skada is described thusly. He was gray, he was cold, he was silent, and he was blind. He crawled like a slow creeping death, too horrible to flee from, froze men with fear in his icy breath, and then crushed them, ground them under his long white belly.
Ew.
Ew.
Don't fancy coming across that on a dark night.
Froze men with fear and his icy breath. And then just grinds them under his body.
Yes, they might be lesser dragons, but still, they're really horrible.
That's the thing. These might be the least mighty. I still don't want anything to do with them.
No thanks.
Much. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's just, ugh. Yeah. I'm getting visions of this big, blind, worm-like thing that is just hideous.
Oh, just and terrifying. And the fact that he's blind, I thought that was really interesting.
Yes. So I wonder what senses he's using to
Flicking his tongue out like a lizard does to sort of pick up all the scents in the air.
It's really playing into all our natural kind of human responses to this kind of thing.
Yeah.
People get grossed out by spiders and certain kinds of wriggly creatures.
Snakes and lizards. And,
Exactly. Yeah. It's really playing into that.
It is, very much so.
So with the Grey Mountains having gone kind of downhill as a neighborhood, the dwarves left there too.
Yeah, what with the dragons and all, yeah.
Well, yes. It just brings the neighborhood a bad name, doesn't it?
They need an HOA.
So Gror, Dain's third son, who survived and who would be the grandfather to Dain the second, leaves for the Iron Hills. But Dain's oldest son, his heir, Thror, heads back to Erebor and he sets up shop. He's got the Arkenstone there, he's got riches, and he has the friendship of the men nearby.
That's right. Lots of trade in things of wonder and beauty, as well as arms. Lots of trade with their kin in the Iron Hills, and this trade makes the neighbors better off. The Northmen, these would indeed be the Northmen who would later become known as the Eotheod and eventually the Rohirrim. They got those guys who lived nearby grew into powerful allies thanks to all this trade.
Right, so things were good. It's party time in Erebor, right?
Yeah, like it's 1999 again.
Like it's 1999, yes. Now, for a description, we've got to go back to the Hobbit and a haughty explanation from Thráin. It would be haughty, that's very Thráin. And he says, "Long ago, in my grandfather Thror's time, our family was driven out of the far north and came back with all their wealth and their tools to this mountain on the map. It had been discovered by my far ancestor, Thráin the Old, but now they mined and they tunneled and they made huger halls and greater workshops. And in addition, I believe they found a good deal of gold and a great many jewels too. Anyway, they grew immensely rich and famous, and my grandfather was king under the mountain again, and treated with great reverence by the mortal men who lived to the south, and were gradually spreading up the running river as far as the valley overshadowed by the mountain. They built the merry town of Dale there in those days."
Boy, that does sound like a really haughty Thráin. Well, anyway, they grew immensely rich, and my grandfather was treated with reverence.
Yes, Thráin the snob.
Get over yourself, Thráin. Now, Thráin also talks about the benefits of that relationship with the local men, right? Kings used to send for our smiths and reward even the least skillful most richly. Fathers would beg us to take their sons as apprentices and pay us handsomely, especially in food supplies, which we never bothered to grow or find for ourselves. Altogether, those were good days for us, and the poorest of us had money to spend and to lend, and leisure to make beautiful things just for the fun of it, not to speak of the most marvelous and magical toys, the like of which is not to be found in the world nowadays. So my grandfather's halls became full of armor and jewels and carvings and cups, and the toy market of Dale was the wonder of the north. Thorin's line right after that is, undoubtedly, that was what brought the dragon, and really that's what the text here is saying, isn't it?
Yes, it is. The news of their wealth reached the dragons and Smaug, who's described here as the greatest of his day. And they did what dragons do. They rained down destruction on Erebor. And in the last bit we skipped reading, we learn that the entire realm of Erebor and the nearby town of Dale were destroyed, utterly destroyed, while Smaug rested on his spoils, as you do.
As you do. And this was in Third Age 2770, almost 800 years after the founding of Erebor. A little bit more timeline details here just to kind of help you line this up with the other events in Middle-earth. This is 11 years after the end of the Long Winter and the death of Helm Hammerhand, which was the start of the second line of the Kings of Rohan.
It really is a time of lots of stuff happening, lots of recognizable figures, isn't it?
It really is.
Yeah. Now, just as before, some dwarves do escape, Thror and his son Thráin II among them, and they head out into a wandering existence with a small group of family and followers, including Thorin, who is not yet Oakenshield. Now, fortunately, the footnote tells us, it was afterwards learned that more of the folk under the mountain had escaped than was at first hoped. but most of these went to the Iron Hills. Right, so Alan, do you want to pick it up?
I do indeed. Years afterwards, Thror, now old, poor, and desperate, gave to his son Thráin the one great treasure he still possessed, the last of the 7 rings, and then he went away with one old companion only, called Nar. Of the ring, he said to Thráin at their parting, "This may prove the foundation of new fortune for you yet, though that seems unlikely. But it needs gold to breed gold." "Surely you don't think of returning to Erebor," said Thráin. "Not at my age," said Thror. "Our vengeance on Smaug I bequeath to you and your sons. But I am tired of poverty and the scorn of men. I go to see what I can find." He did not say where. He was a little crazed, perhaps, with age and misfortune, and long brooding on the splendor of Moria in his forefathers' days. Or the ring, it may be, was turning to evil now that its master was awake, driving him to folly and destruction. From Dunland, where he was then dwelling, he went north with Nar, and they crossed the Redhorn Pass and came down into Azanulbizar. When Thror came to Moria, the gate was open. Nar begged him to beware, but he took no heed of him, and walked proudly in as an heir that returns. But he did not come back. Nar stayed nearby for many days in hiding. One day he heard a loud shout and the blare of a horn, and a body was flung out on the steps. Fearing that it was Thror, he began to creep near, but there came a voice from within the gate. "Come on, beardling, we can see you. But there's no need to be afraid today. We need you as a messenger." Then Nar came up and found that it was indeed the body of Thror, but the head was severed and lay face downwards. As he knelt there, he heard orc laughter in the shadows, and the voice said, "If beggars will not wait at the door but sneak in to try thieving, that is what we do to them. If any of your people poke their foul beards in here again, they will fare the same. Go and tell them so. But if his family wish to know who is now king here, the name is written on his face. I wrote it. I killed him. I am the master." Then Nar turned the head and saw branded on the brow in dwarf runes, so that he could read it, the name Azog.
By the way, that was amazing reading of an orc.
Oh, thank you. I love reading the villains. They're so much fun.
Villain voices, yes.
They're the most fun to do, for sure.
So that's a sad end, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Really sad, a really violent end.
Yeah, indeed. Ooh. So years into their homeless wandering, Thror gives the last of the 7 rings to his son Thráin, and he left with one other dwarf, Nar. And before he left, he spoke to Thráin about the ring, that it could be the source of new wealth, but that it needs gold to breed gold.
I like that phrasing. And it does. I mean, that's the thing.
It does, yes. It's true.
It's absolutely true. If we revisit what we know about the 7 rings, and we learn this from of the Rings of Power in the Third Age in the Silmarillion, 7 rings he gave to the dwarves, talking about Sauron, but to men he gave 9, for men proved in this matter, as in others, the readiest to his will. And all those rings that he governed, he perverted, the more easily, since he had a part in their making, and they were accursed, and they betrayed in the end all those that used them. The dwarves indeed proved tough and hard to tame. They ill endure the domination of others, and the thoughts of their hearts are hard to fathom, nor can they be turned to shadows. They used their rings only for the getting of wealth, but wrath and an overmastering greed of gold were kindled in their hearts, of which evil enough after came to the prophet of Sauron. It is said that the foundation of each of the 7 hordes of the dwarf kings of old was a golden ring, but all those hordes long ago were plundered, and the dragons devoured them, and of the 7 rings some were consumed in fire, and some Sauron recovered.
That's really good. And it reminds me that Tolkien has often written about things like hoards and, that kind of almost dragon sickness when it comes to gold and things. And we get a real sense of that here. What this reminds me of is that wonderful poem, Yumonna Gold Galdrebawunden, also known as the Hoard.
Yeah.
Which talks about exactly this, that, you build up a hoard and that's all your life is about. And then someone else comes and takes it from you. And the same thing happens to them.
Yep. Exactly right.
Now, next week, we'll get to a line in the appendix about this ring, that the dwarves believed it to have been the first of the 7 to be forged, and that it was given directly to Durin the III, then the king of Khazad-dûm, by the elven smiths, and not by Sauron.
It's interesting because when we look at the history of Galadriel and Celeborn from Unfinished Tales, we read that after Sauron tortured Celebrimbor, he learned from him where the 7 were bestowed, which certainly implies that they'd already been given, but not necessarily to any of the dwarves.
Right. And in fact, in a bracketed note, Christopher explains, it is not actually said here that Sauron at this time took possession of the 7 rings, though the implication seems clear that he did so. He then references the line that we just quoted about Durin being allegedly given the ring directly, before adding that nothing is said in the present text about the way in which the 7 rings came into the possession of the dwarfs. So why is it such a mystery?
It's another one of those things that Tolkien never really got into about, how these rings were distributed. Do I want to believe that this ring was given to them directly by Celebrimbor? I'd like to believe that, but...
But
that's the thing. I have the feeling that in this case, that's just wishful thinking.
I think so too. And I think, honestly, Tolkien often leaves these gaps in the histories, and that mirrors what it's like in the primary world anyway. There are gaps in histories, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And here, this particular kind of story is almost certainly going to have multiple perspectives, each of which is going to tell the story in their own way, in a way that makes them look best, if you like. The dwarves are going to claim that this ring came first from Celebrimbor. But, if Sauron ever sat down and wrote his diary, he's definitely going to say, "Dear diary, today I handed over this ring," right?
That's right.
Yeah. So it kind of makes sense that certain things are left without being said explicitly, this is what happened. Some things that are that far in the past just are mysterious.
Yeah, it's good to have competing versions of a story, too. Even though that can be a little frustrating when we're trying to figure out what actually happened. But yeah, you're right. Sauron's going to say this is how it went down, and the dwarves are going to say this is. But coming back to the text, of course, they talk a little bit before he leaves about Thror's plans and whether he's thinking about going back to deal with Smaug and Erebor, which would be a terrible idea.
A very bad idea.
But it's worse than that, Thráin.
Oh, dear.
He doesn't tell his son, but he heads back to Moria, leaving the task of vengeance to Thráin and Thorin, etc. Gee, Dad, thanks. Thanks so very much. I feel like Feanor's sons, as Feanor was dying, like he knew with the certainty of death that nobody was ever going to overcome Thangorodrim. But sons, go get him.
Yep.
I mean, thanks, Dad.
Yep. How do the wheels of that bus feel as they roll right over you? So he and Nar head out, and it's unclear whether this poor decision-making is a result of age or obsession or bad luck, or whether the ring was contributing. Maybe it's a combination of all of them.
That's the thing. I mean, it seems to be placed in the sentence as an or, but both? Why not both? Yeah.
Well, yes, yeah, absolutely. Because he is old, he is bitter, he is poor.
Yeah.
He's obsessed with not being at least 2 of those things.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, bad luck, there's an extent to which you've got to take some kind of responsibility for your own choices here. Yeah. It's not bad luck that he meets up with orcs in Moria because they're there. It's not bad luck.
Yeah, and because you walked in pridefully like you were the heir of this place. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, you can almost imagine the scene. He goes, strolling right in and says, "Right, you lot out. This is mine." I don't think that's going to work.
We're going to have a chat about that. Yeah.
Yeah, but whatever the cause of his decision, he makes his way from Dunland. Homeless wanderings have taken them pretty far.
Yeah. Up
to the Redhorn Pass and down into Azanul Bizarre.
Now, this is after the West Gate of Moria was made. We talked about this before when they fled Moria. So why cross over the mountains to get into Moria from the east side? Like, why not just go in the doors of Durin? The only thing I can think of is something we talked about before. Why did they flee out that gate? It's that the oldest parts of Khazad-dûm were in the east, where it had originally first been built. That's presumably where, most of the halls, the places where they lived were in the eastern side. But I had a question. I wondered what your thoughts were on this. Could the Watcher have already been there?
Yes, well, that would make a lot of sense, because you've got to ask yourself why it is they're taking that enormous detour.
Yeah.
Why do that unless something is there that you're more frightened of?
Right.
Something that is barring the way, if you like. You're already dealing with a Balrog on the inside, and if you know you're dealing with a Watcher on the outside, that's a lot.
That is a lot. That is an absolute lot, yeah. So, understandably, they'd go the long way. And when he gets to that main gate, that is, of course, the east gate, it is open. And honestly, I've got to say that cannot be good.
No.
If I come home after I've been gone for a few weeks and the door to my house is open, I don't know that I'm going in without an army.
I think that's fair.
Yeah.
Yes.
Nar does what he can. And can I just say I love his name? Nar. He's a pirate dwarf.
You're suddenly from Somerset.
Yeah, he's just Nar. Great name. He, of course, is like, you might want to take it easy, sir. There might be bad guys about.
And we're down to Devon.
See, that's the thing. The lovely thing about making this stuff up as I go is I have no clue. And thank you for telling me where I ended up coming from.
And it doesn't matter. It's all good.
Sort of like we talked about Tom Bombadil's appearance on Rings of
his
Power.
wandering accent, bless him.
So Thror goes straight in as though this were his birthright, and things go very poorly.
Yeah. And then days pass and he doesn't come out. Nar is hiding and waiting until he then hears a horn and a shout and a body is thrown out onto the stairs. And he's trying to sneak his way up to see if it's Thror, but who else is it going to be?
Really?
Nobody else has been dumb enough to go in there.
Exactly.
But an orc voice tells him that he doesn't have to sneak. Today he's safe because he's needed to take a message to the dwarves.
That's right. And of course it is Thror. So the voice gives Nar the message, calling Thror a beggar and a thief and threatening to kill any dwarf who enters Moria. Basically, this is our place.
Throwing down that challenge. And he says, if you want to know the name of the king here in Moria, it's written on his head.
Oh, at least it's in dwarf runes. That's better than, say, Comic Sans.
That would be rude.
That would just be insulting.
Yes, it would.
Or worse would be papyrus, but we won't get into
Lord.
that. Dwarf
or
runes.
Wingdings.
Oh, goodness, wingdings. Oh, totally illegible. I can't. What does this say?
And why? Now, the name is Azog, and he clearly wanted the attention of the dwarves, and he gets it.
I'm just glad his name wasn't John Jacob Jinglehanger Smith. Hang on a minute, I'm still carving my name.
This dwarf does not have a big enough head.
Seriously.
Now, in the part that we skipped reading, there's a footnote. It mentions that Azog is the father of Bolg, who is the leader of the goblins in the Battle of Five Armies in The Hobbit. And he is slain by Beorn, if I can recall correctly.
That is correct. Now, speaking of The Hobbit, though, for almost 30 years of its publication, until the third edition in 1966, Thror was said to have been killed in the mines of Moria by a goblin, unnamed. And it was only in that third edition, published a decade after The Lord of the Rings, that his killer was named as Azog the Goblin.
Now, Nar wants to take the head with him. Ew. That's
really?
a bit of a gruesome souvenir.
Do you want to? No, that's not a good idea.
I went all the way to Moria and all I got.
Stupid head. That's great. Oh,
I'd have preferred a t-shirt.
Seriously, please.
But Azog tells him to leave it, and he tosses him a few worthless coins for just added insult.
I know. Like, here's a few pennies. Like, I know I'm poor, but that's ridiculous. Yeah.
But Nar does what he's told. He turns around and leaves. And then he looks back and he sees the orcs already hacking up Thror's body.
What about his legs? He doesn't need those.
Looks like meat's back on the menu, boys.
Yeah, and thrown it to the crows.
That's just nasty. and rude.
Folks, if you're enjoying the PPP, please consider supporting the show by joining the Fellowship of the Podcast. It's what gives me the time and resources to work on making this show the best that it can be. And when you join, you become part of an amazing Discord community. And that includes live episode recordings. One of them is happening right now, and hangouts every month. You also get episode postscripts. You can get ad-free episodes, free merch, and more.
And you can also become part of our Questions After Nightfall episodes, or even join us as a guest in the North Wing. So please go to patreon.com/prancingponypod to show your support and join the Fellowship of the Podcast.
You can always help us out by giving us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts as well, and a rating on Spotify. And please recommend us to your friends. Now, what happens after this little visit at the gates of Moria? Sara?
Okay, well, settle back in your armchair, put your feet up, grab your cup of tea, and I will tell you. For such was the tale that Nar brought back to Thráin, and when he had wept and torn his beard, he fell silent. 7 days he sat and said no word. Then he stood up and said, "This cannot be borne." That was the beginning of the war of the dwarves and the orcs, which was long and deadly, and fought for the most part in deep places beneath the earth. Thráin at once sent messengers bearing the tale, north, east, and west, but it was 3 years before the dwarves had mustered their strength. Durin's folk gathered all their host, and they were joined by great forces sent from the houses of other fathers, for this dishonour to the heir of the eldest of their race filled them with wrath. When all was ready, they assailed and sacked, one by one, all the strongholds of the orcs that they could find, from Gundabad to the Gladden. Both sides were pitiless. There was death and cruel deeds by dark and by light. But the dwarves had the victory through their strength and their matchless weapons, and the fire of their anger, as they hunted for Azog in every den under the mountain. At last, all the orcs that fled before them were gathered in Moria, and the dwarf host in pursuit came to Azanulbizar. That was a great vale that lay between the arms of the mountains about the lake of Keled-Zaram, and had been of old part of the kingdom of Khazad-dûm. When the dwarves saw the gate of their ancient mansions upon the hillside, they sent up a great shout like thunder in the valley. But a great host of foes was arrayed on the slopes above them, and out of the gates poured a multitude of orcs that had been held back by Azog for the last need. At first, fortune was against the dwarves, for it was a dark day of winter without sun, and the orcs did not waver, and they outnumbered their enemies and had the higher ground. So began the battle of Azanulbizar, or Nanduhirion in the Elvish tongue, at the memory of which the orcs still shudder and the dwarves weep. The first assault of the vanguard led by Thráin was thrown back with loss, and Thráin was driven into a wood of great trees that then still grew not far from Keled-Zaram. There Frerin his son fell, and Fundin his kinsman, and many others, and both Thráin and Thorin were wounded.
Oh, man, the Battle of Azanulbizar.
I love the Elvish name for that, Nanduhirion.
All the names here are great. I love that when we get to Moria the very first time, or when we get to Eregion, and Gimli kind of names the three peaks, and then we get the common speech names and the Elvish names. It's really nice to get them all together. But you're right, Nanduhirion is a lovely sounding name.
It is.
Now, are we surprised that an action like, I don't know, carving your name into the severed head of a former king instigates war? No. No,
not
we're
so
not
much.
surprised.
No.
Nar brings the message back to Thror's son, Thráin, who mourns and sits quietly for a full week before declaring war. And again, just to put this in the timeline, Thror's death took place in Third Age 2790. That's 20 years after Smaug took Erebor.
And he sends messengers out with the news and the details, seeking to bring their forces together for one decisive campaign. And it takes 3 full years for the dwarves to gather their forces together. And again, to put this into the timeline, it's Third Age 2793.
Now, of course, it's not just the Longbeards either. That's what's interesting about this. We read that great forces were sent by the other houses, so no wonder it took 3 years. I mean, these houses were founded out in far areas like Rune. I don't know where they are now. We're never told. But clearly getting the messages, gathering the armies, transporting the armies takes a long time.
It does, yeah. And why would those other houses join in this fight? The text says it's because this dishonor to the heir of the eldest of their race filled them with wrath. So they might not be of Durin's house, but Durin is the first and clearly is someone to esteem.
Indeed. So they start attacking all the strongholds, starting in the north with Gundabad all the way south down to the Gladden. Now remember, we talked earlier about Gundabad being where Durin woke up. But we didn't say where we learned that. That's actually in that same essay of Dwarves and Men that we've looked at before and will undoubtedly look at again at length in 2 weeks, found in The Peoples of Middle-earth.
And there we read about the name Gundabad, that it was in origin a Khuzdul name, and that it's where the ancestor of the Longbeards awoke, that is Durin. And because of this, Gundabad was therefore revered by the dwarves, and its occupation in the Third Age by the orcs was one of the chief reasons for their great hatred of the orcs. And that also then helps explain the willingness of these other houses of the dwarves to come and do a little bit of house cleaning. Yeah.
I mean, therefore revered by the dwarves, not just therefore revered by the Longbeards. I think that says a lot.
It does, yeah.
So this, of course, was not a pretty war, as if war ever is. Both sides are described as being pitiless. We get this line, kind of scary line, really, about cruel deeds being done by dark and by light. Quick question for you, dark and light. Are we talking about under the mountains and in the daylight? Or are we talking about dark like orcs, light like dwarves? That is, the good and the bad guys both did cruel deeds here.
Oh, what I love about Tolkien's writing is often there are many layers of meaning.
Yeah.
And I would just answer yes, actually,
why not
to
both?
this.
Right.
Right. I don't see why not both here. You can read it metaphorically and you can read it as being, this is geographically what was going on and where.
Yeah.
So yes, I would say that by dark and by light, inside and outside, and the evil forces and the good forces, that works for me. Yeah. What do you think?
I agree. I mean, that's the thing. It's another one of those things where it means a lot more than it says on its face. It means a lot.
That's very Tolkien though, right?
It is. And I think it's also very Tolkien that he points out that the good guys here are not immune to committing terrible, cruel deeds.
That's true.
You know, we even get hints of that with men as well. I'm trying to remember some of the spots, but there are sort of hints that, you know, there are some things that are unfortunate to have happened, shall we say.
That's a nice way of putting it, isn't it?
Trying to find ways.
Yeah, but that's why war is just awful no matter what.
It's war. Yeah. That's the thing. And now I'm thinking of the line from, I think it's Fallout, war never changes. Eventually, thanks to their superior weapons and their fury, the dwarves emerged the victors in this war, but the hunt for Azog continued, and it honestly took a while. I mean, we're told that the War of the Dwarves and Orcs lasted for 6 years.
Yikes.
Until the upcoming Battle of Nandahirion in Third Age 2799.
So as the dwarves sweep from north to south, the surviving orcs keep moving south to Moria. And that's where they all are when the army of the dwarves meets them in the Dimril Dale. So we arrive at the moment when the dwarves see the great east gate of Moria and they cheer like thunder, only to see that they are nowhere near achieving total victory yet.
Sorry. Woohoo, it's Moria. Oh, wait a minute. We've got a huge army in front of us, and they're in superior position, right? They're up the slope. We have the high ground, Anakin. I mean, that's the first thing I thought of when I read that. I'm like, oh no, the orcs are Obi-Wan. And the army, this huge orc army that's already huge, is being reinforced with yet more orcs, just flooding from the gate of Moria. And this is the start of the Battle of Azanulbazar. And boy, it does not start out well for the dwarves, does it?
No. The weather isn't helping for a start. The orcs hate the sun, but this is a dark winter's day. So orc morale and, of course, their skin tone is completely unaffected. They don't need to put on the factor 50.
Exactly. They don't have to even think about slathering on the sunscreen. They're just getting out there ready to do battle.
Exactly. Now, when you combine that with the higher ground, it's a tough fight for the dwarves.
That it is. What do you think, by the way, about this almost spoilery statement at the beginning of the description of the battle? We get the name of it, right? At the memory of which the orcs still shudder and the dwarves weep.
Now, there are certain battles throughout the history of Middle Earth, if you like, that are so huge that those who participated on whichever side, it's going to be one of those that goes down in their histories as being absolutely terrible. And it's spoilery in the sense that if the orcs shudder, we know that terrible things happen to the orcs. And if the dwarves weep, we know that terrible things happen to the dwarves too. Yeah. This is not the kind of battle where one side gets utterly overwhelmed by the other side and it's just a rout.
Right.
This is a battle where the two sides are going to just fight it out until so many on both sides are dead.
Attrition.
It's the Nirnaeth Anoidiad again, isn't it?
Yes, that's exactly the one I was thinking of when you started talking about, how both sides look at this and, there was a lot of loss there.
Yeah. And we do get a brief description of the early stages of the battle. So the vanguard's initial assault is completely blunted, with Thráin driven back into a forested area, and that's where his second son Thráin is killed, as well as Fundin.
Now, Fundin is his second cousin. Fundin's grandfather, Borin, was the brother of Thráin's grandfather, Dain the First.
And Thráin himself is wounded, and we'll see the extent of his wounds later today, and so is his eldest son, Thorin.
Ooh, and this is where we get the cool stuff about his name in the footnote. That reads, "It is said that Thorin's shield was cloven, and he cast it away, and he hewed off with his axe a branch of an oak, and held it in his left hand to ward off the strokes of his foes, or to wield as a club. In this way, he got his name."
Oh, that's Marvel kind of superhero backstory, isn't it?
I love it. And it's just buried in a footnote in the appendices.
Yeah, and that's another thing that, in The Hobbit, he's Thorin Oakenshield, and it's never explained.
Yeah. It's not. I mean, to his credit, even though I've criticized the films a lot, Jackson did at least do that, didn't he? He pulled this footnote out and told the story, showed the story.
Yeah, that's true. But I'm not giving him too much credit for the Hobbit film.
That's because that happened in the first movie, which was still okay.
Yeah. So moving on. Yeah. The battle is uncertain the whole day, with both sides suffering huge losses until finally the dwarves of the Iron Hills come and their numbers and their freshness end the battle. And these reinforcements make an immediate impact, driving through the remaining orc formations all the way to the east gate of Moria. It's like the dwarves of the Iron Hills, they always seem to wait until the end and they sweep in and save the day, right?
Like, where were you at the beginning? We could have used you a couple hours ago.
Right, we might not have had so many losses. I mean, they do the same thing in the Battle of the Five Armies.
That's exactly what I was thinking, to show up like clean sweep. All right, here's your reinforcements.
You could just imagine them sitting on the hillside. Is it time to go yet? No, not yet. I haven't finished my cup of tea.
That's right. Exactly. Still time to have something to eat before we head down the hill. Yeah. So their battle cry, by the way, when these dwarves of the Iron Hills shows up, is one word, one name, Azog. The name of the orc that has fueled this 6-year quest for vengeance by the dwarves. I mean, a lot of times you think about the dwarves arriving, you imagine them saying, Baruk Kazad, I Menu, right? The axes of the dwarves are upon you. No, they're just shouting, Azog, Azog, Azog.
Ooh, that would be terrifying.
If you're Azog, you're like, can I find a large rock to hide behind? Yeah.
Where's the exit?
Yeah. Mattocks, by the way, for the word that you saw here about the mattocks, the weapons they're using. For those who don't know, they're similar to a pickaxe, right? They have a very long handle and a very heavy head, as opposed to like an axe where it's all about the fine cutting edge and it's not necessarily super heavy. This is an agricultural tool. It combines two blades. One of the blades is always an adze. Now think of an adze like a horizontal axe blade. So instead of being up and down, it's left to right. If it has that and a pick, then it's called a pick mattock. The other kind, called a cutter mattock, combines the adze with an axe. So you have one blade that's horizontal, usually used for breaking up soil and roots, and then the vertical blade, the traditional axe. So they are used for grubbing in hard soils and rocky ground. There's no word here as to whether it's a cutter mattock or a pick mattock that they're using, but I'm going to lean towards the idea of a pick mattock because it sure would be great for piercing armor.
Yes. And honestly, thinking about them wielding these sorts of weapons, it would be absolutely terrifying as a sight.
Utterly terrifying. And because they're so heavy, right? These are going to have incredible, that's why I lean towards a pick mattock, because it's with that much weight, it's going to have a lot more force. And to have all that force at a single point where that point hits armor, if the orcs are, if any of them are armored, and we discover that some of them are, in fact, it's going to make quick work of that. Man.
I think you're right about the pick mattock, because you would be able to swing it in all different directions. So you'd be able to swing it downwards to pierce armor and to, hack down into a body. But you'd be able to swing the other blade around in a circle around you to cut into those that are around you. It would really be an excellent blade for both defense and attack, wouldn't it?
I think it would be. And, it's heavy, so it's a little slow probably, but it's mighty powerful in the hands of a dwarf. So,
yeah, well, I wouldn't argue with a dwarf who's got a pick mattock in his hand.
Or even a cutter mattock for that matter.
No, that is very true.
Either way, I'm just not going to, you go right ahead, sir.
So on that note, do you want to pick up the next bit? Because this is where it really gets exciting.
I do. Then Nine stood up before the gate and cried with a great voice, "Azog! If you're in, come out, or is the play in the valley too rough?" Thereupon Azog came forth, and he was a great orc with a huge iron-clad head, and yet agile and strong. With him came many like him, the fighters of his guard, and as they engaged Nine's company, he turned to Nine and said, "What? Yet another beggar at my doors? Must I brand you too?" With that, he rushed at Nine, and they fought. But Nine was half blind with rage, and also very weary with battle, whereas Azog was fresh and fell and full of guile. Soon Nine made a great stroke with all his strength that remained, but Azog darted aside and kicked Nine's leg, so that the mattock splintered on the stone where he had stood, but Nine stumbled forward. Then Azog, with a swift swing, hewed his neck. His mail collar withstood the edge, but so heavy was the blow that Nine's neck was broken, and he fell. Then Azog laughed, and he lifted up his head to let forth a great yell of triumph. But the cry died in his throat, for he saw that all his host in the valley was in a rout, and the dwarves went this way and that, slaying as they would, and those that could escape from them were flying south, shrieking as they ran. And hard by, all the soldiers of his guard lay dead. He turned and fled back towards the gate. Up the steps after him leaped a dwarf with a red axe. It was Dine Ironfoot, Nine's son. Right before the doors he caught Azog, and there he slew him and hewed off his head. That was held a great feat, for Dine was then only a stripling in the reckoning of the dwarves. But long life and many battles lay before him, until old but unbowed he fell at last in the War of the Ring. Yet hardy and full of wrath as he was, it is said that when he came down from the gate, he looked grey in the face, as one who has felt great fear. When at last the battle was won, the dwarves that were left gathered in Azanulbizar. They took the head of Azog and thrust into its mouth the purse of small money, and then they set it on a stake. But no feast nor song was there that night, for their dead were beyond the count of grief. Barely half of their number, it is said, could still stand or had hope of healing. Nonetheless, in the morning, Thráin stood before them. He had one eye blinded beyond cure, and he was halt with a leg wound. But he said, "Good, we have the victory. Khazad-dûm is ours." But they answered, "Durin's heir you may be, but even with one eye you should see clearer. We fought this war for vengeance, and vengeance we have taken. but it is not sweet. If this is victory, then our hands are too small to hold it. And those who were not of Durin's folk said also, Khazad-dûm was not our father's house. What is it to us, unless a hope of treasure? But now, if we must go without the rewards and the were-guilds that are owed to us, the sooner we return to our own lands, the better pleased we shall be. Then Thráin turned to Dain and said, But surely my own kin will not desert me. No, said Dain, you are the father of our folk, and we have bled for you, and will again. But we will not enter Khazad-dûm. You will not enter Khazad-dûm. Only I have looked through the shadow of the gate. Beyond the shadow it waits for you still, Durin's bane. The world must change, and some other power than ours must come, before Durin's folk walk again in Moria.
Ooh, very prescient of him.
Yeah, very prophetic. We don't see a lot of dwarven prophecy, but that sure feels like that, doesn't it?
A little bit of foresight going on there, isn't there?
And I just saw it. Yeah, that too, definitely.
So Nine gets to the gate and he calls out for Azog. Mm-hmm. And a reminder that as Gror's son, he is first cousin to Thráin, as Dain the First was their grandfather.
That's right. Now, this moment isn't exactly, and Morgoth came, but it's still a pretty terrifying moment. I mean, Azog is a well-armored great orc. We know how ferocious he is. He's described here as having incredible strength and agility, and a bodyguard of similar great orcs. This is the elite of the orc army. And while Azog's orcs begin the fight with Nine's company, Azog heads straight for Nine himself. And we get the reminder about beggars and brands. I mean, this is high-level trash talk. He knows what he's doing.
Oh, yes. And so even though Nine and his warriors were fresh reinforcements, they're not really fresh. It's been a long march, and they've been fighting their way to the gates.
Yeah.
On the other hand, Azog is completely fresh, and apparently he's a rather skilled fighter. Nine goes for a killing blow, but Azog dodges it. He throws Nine off balance and immediately then hews at his neck. And sure, the armor protects his head from being removed from his body, but the blow itself was strong enough to break his neck anyway.
That is something. I mean, that's a lot of force to be able to break a neck with just one hack of whatever weapon he has. Azog, of course, is quite pleased with himself. Very short, made this, it's all over. We're going to win now. He's about to shout out a yell, and he notices that, oh no, oh no, my entire army is being routed. The dwarves are killing at will. My orcs are just running as fast as they can away from the fight. And even my entire bodyguard is dead. So,
whoops.
The orc that he is, he runs back to the gate.
That's enough of that.
Yeah, I'm done now. Yeah.
But before he can get there, Dain Ironfoot, the son of Nine, who is now lying dead nearby, he catches him and he kills him, cutting off his head.
Oh, yeah.
And Dain was considered pretty young to accomplish something like this in battle. He was born in 2767, so he's only 32 years old here. Yeah. Now you compare this to Thráin, who was 195 in the Battle of Five Armies, and 53 years old here at this battle. And that would have been more kind of seen as the prime of life.
Right.
32 is still very young.
32 is very young for a dwarf. I mean, even 53 is like, he's a little young, but he'll be all right. Certainly, like you said, sort of the prime, sort of the way we might view somebody in their mid-20s. Like, okay, you're physically a specimen. You might not have all the wisdom you're going to have later, but you could still be a pretty good fighter.
Yeah, you possibly got the ability to get a six-pack.
Exactly. So. Yeah. A 32-year-old is really, really young for a dwarf. So
yeah.
We get another spoiler here in the text. We talked about the description or the name of the battle. Here we get one about Dain himself, how old but unbowed he fell at last in the War of the Ring. And
right.
You're like, oh no, he does this great thing and then he dies. But interestingly, even though you probably remember that death from somewhere, if you happen to be reading the appendices in order for the first time, you wouldn't have known it yet.
Nope, because it's only later in this appendix, in a part we won't get to till next week, that we read Gandalf giving us a some say moment. And he says, "Now we hear that Dain has fallen, fighting in Dale again, even while we fought here. I should call that a heavy loss, if it was not a wonder rather that in his great age he could still wield his axe as mightily as they say that he did, standing over the body of King Brand before the gate of Erebor until the darkness fell." Note that his great age is 252.
That's pretty significant. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of a long beard that is a long grey beard at that point.
I feel pretty young at this point. I mean, really.
Well, that's nice for you, Alan. Makes a lovely change.
I mean, I've still got 200 years to go.
How many?
Well,
you want to revise that number?
A little less, 196.
Okay. Moving on.
Something. In Appendix B, The Tale of Years, we actually get the full version of his death. Because, there it's a Gandalf sort of some say, and, he might have been standing over the body. We actually get the full version of The Tale of Years. At the same time as the great armies besieged Minas Tirith, a host of the allies of Sauron that had long threatened the borders of King Brand crossed the river Carnan, and Brand was driven back to Dale. There he had the aid of the dwarves of Erebor, and there was a great battle at the mountain's feet. It lasted 3 days, but in the end, both King Brand and King Dain Ironfoot were slain, and the Easterlings had the victory. But they could not take the gate, and many, both dwarves and men, took refuge in Erebor, and there withstood a siege. So
it's good to get that backstory.
Dain's a hero.
Or forward story.
Yeah, exactly. Sort of a flash forward. But what's most relevant here isn't how great a warrior he was early in his life, or even the fact that he would die in 3019 at the gate of Erebor. What matters here for this story is that when he came down from the gate, he looked like he'd seen a ghost. And we're going to learn precisely what he saw in just a bit.
Right. Now, the battle is now over, and they do a little symbolic victory bit of shoving that bag of coins in the mouth of the head of Azog. But that's pretty much all the celebrating that they can do, because this is a classic Pyrrhic victory, a 50% casualty rate. And this is at the end of a 6-year campaign that has undoubtedly cost more lives as well.
Yeah, I mean, you wonder how many of the dwarves that first set out on this series of battles 6 years ago are still alive.
Right.
It can't be very many.
No, that's going to hurt a lot of these houses.
Yeah, especially when we know, as we'll learn in a couple of weeks, that dwarves just don't reproduce their population very quickly. So we talked before about Thráin getting injured along with Thorin back when his son Frerin and cousin Fundin were killed in that forested area that they retreated to. This is the moment that we were referring to then, which is where we see his injuries. Here he's got a bad leg wound, and he's got an eye that's been permanently blinded. Despite that, Thráin still counts this as a victory, and he says, Khazad-dûm is ours.
Yes, talk about being blind.
Yeah.
The dwarves make it clear this wasn't a war to regain territory. This was a war for vengeance. And we've got that with Azog's death. But this victory is really bitter. This phrase, "our hands are too small to hold it," that's a really potent phrase.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah, and they're right. They're absolutely right. I mean, if they tried going into Moria now, it's going to be a whole mess, and they've already been through a mess. And the dwarves of the other houses have nothing to do with Khazad-dûm, unless it's to get a bit of treasure or weregild, and the chances of that are not great.
No.
And they say if that's not coming, then we're just going to head on home. Thank you very much.
Indeed. Now, we have looked at weregild before. It's come up a few times. I want to take a very quick sidebar on that. I want to go back to the times that we saw the word first, at least historically speaking. First, after Felaroth threw the king of the Eotheod Leod to his death, his son Eorl hunted him. This is the horse, the lord of the Miras, before telling him to come and get a new name. And he says, Felaroth, I name you. You loved your freedom, and I do not blame you for that. But now you owe me a great weregild, and you shall surrender your freedom to me until your life's end. And he does.
Yep. And then there's the fifth king of Rohan's second line, Fulkweena, the great-grandfather of Theoden. He sent his 2 sons, Fulkred and Fastred, to Gondor to help him battle with the Haradrim, where they died. And after their death, we learn that Gondor's steward at the time, and this is Durin II, Tolkien really did like to reuse names,
He did.
Sent to Fulkweena a rich weregild of gold. But the one that most folks will remember is when Isildur used the idea of weregild as a rationale for taking the One Ring, as told by Elrond in the council. And he says, but Isildur would not listen to our counsel. This I will have as weregild for my father and my brother, he said. And therefore, whether we would or no, he took it to treasure it.
And then, of course, there's this example of weregild that we just read. So I want to talk about the word just a little bit. It's not surprisingly Old English uses the elements were, meaning man, and geld, meaning payment or tribute.
Yeah, and folks, you probably come across were, meaning man, in werewolf.
Yep.
So,
Same root.
So weregild is defined as a set sum of money as the value of a free man based on social rank and pain as compensation for his murder or injury in discharge of punishment or vengeance.
It's typically a set sum, often codified into law. Second, it's the value of a free man. So the killing of a slave didn't warrant weregild, maybe reimbursement for lost property, but not weregild. And of course, this is the interesting part. It was very much based on social rank, and we'll get to more on that in a second. Fourth, it was paid in discharge of punishment or vengeance. And that's really where this concept started. In the early Germanic societies where this came about, the other common form of legal reparation was blood revenge. And this could wipe out entire clans. So the idea was, let's develop a means of legal reparation that would prevent these generation-spanning feuds.
Right, which is why weregild is often referred to as man price or blood money. And the payment was typically made to the family of the dead man or to his clan. Mm-hmm. And we actually have laws dating back to the 10th century that give us actual prices, right?
I love it. It's like a menu of dead men.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay, so you were one of these, that's worth 10 pence. Yeah. So anyway, a ceorl, the lowest rank of free man, had a weregild of 200 coins. But if he was a prospering ceorl, killing him would cost you 2,000 coins. I presume ceorl, that's the origin of the word churl.
Yes,
that we see.
Is.
Yes,
mm-hmm.
Yeah. So further up the chain, an ealdor man, what would later be known as an earl, would cost 8,000 coins, and a king 30,000 coins. So, you're best off, if you've not got too much money, you're best off killing one of your cheaper men rather than going straight for the top.
Don't go after an alderman or the king, In fact, you should target, sadly, a Welshman, because the prospering Welshmen were only worth 120. Non-prospering Welshmen were worth 80. A landless Welshman was only 70 coins. So a king was worth more than 420 landless Welshmen. Your thoughts, Sara?
You really want them? Because we'd have to do a lot of bleeping out.
I know. I was like, man, do I really want to go here on this? No.
Honestly, I wish I was surprised.
I know.
I'm not surprised.
No, how can we be surprised?
No. After all, the history of Wales is immersed in the way in which the English subjugated us as a people and as a country. Mm-hmm. This has been going on for centuries, and I am not in the least bit stunned.
Nope.
Yeah. So I just... not surprised at all.
We could do a sidebar on this, but we're running out of time. So we'll visit that in the P5.
Yes. It does get worse,
it does,
by the way.
It? Yeah.
It does, because if the victim was a woman, compensation was typically half that of a man. Now, you can just imagine what I think of that.
I don't even know that I have to imagine much, actually.
No. And also, it's absolutely stupid, anyway, this idea that a woman is worth less. Because, all right, so, I don't know, you've lost your wife. So you get half the amount of coin that would be due if you'd lost your brother or something. Mm-hmm. But is your brother washing your socks, looking after your kids, cleaning the house? No, are you going to have to pay for someone to come in and do that? I bet you wish you had more money now, don't you?
I bet you do. Now, Matt and I actually spent even more time on this whole idea of weregild in the mega postscript that we did for episodes 352 and 353. So if you're a member of the Fellowship of the Podcast, you want to check out your special feed for that. The point of all this is that the dwarves of these other houses expect, reasonably so, to be compensated for their dead with the riches of Moria. And the fact is, look, if that isn't going to happen, we're just packing up and going home.
And that's fair, because in all this, Thráin, whose victory he owes to Durin, turns to him and basically says, "You're not leaving too, right?" And this is where we learn what Durin saw in the gate. Mm-hmm. He acknowledges Thráin's kinship and the sacrifices that they've made, but
he makes it clear that not only will we not enter Khazad-dûm, you aren't even going to enter Khazad-dûm. I am the only one here who has looked through the shadow of the gate. I'm the only one who's poked my head in there, and I know that Durin's bane, the Balrog that caused our folk to flee Moria more than 800 years ago, is still there.
Right, now there's a bit of dwarven prophecy here. Mm-hmm. The world is going to have to change, and there will have to be some other power beyond the dwarves before we walk in Moria again. And he's not wrong, but that won't stop Balin from trying in about 200 years' time.
I know, in only 200 years, he's thinking, what? Well, has the world changed yet, Balin? Maybe you shouldn't do this.
Not enough.
Not enough. Now, as to whether Khazad-dûm was ever restored in the Fourth Age, we'll get to that next time.
Yeah.
Then Barlaman turned to Bob and Nob and said, but surely you will not desert me. No, said Bob, but we will not enter the Prancing Pony. You will not enter the Prancing Pony. Only I have looked through the shadow of the front door. Beyond the bar, it waits for you still, the mailbag. Sara, what does Barlaman have for us tonight?
We have a question from Christine of Connecticut.
All right.
And she asks, are the dwarves inherently greedy and materialistic? Or is that just a stereotype?
Oh, that's a tough one, right?
Isn't it?
I mean, because is it fair to say that Tolkien tapped into that stereotype in creating the dwarves?
Yeah, well, if you go back to the very, 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 very beginning, right at the beginning of the histories of Middle-earth and that sort of thing, the dwarves are actually evil.
Yeah, exactly. They're bad guys, and they're very much greedy. Yeah.
Yep, and they're driven, in fact, by their desire for gold. And even in trade, they come off as, the worst of the Wall Street businessmen kind of idea. They are Gordon Gekko with beards.
And now I want that as our chapter art, but we're not doing that. Megan's done some really great art already with an axe. We're not going to do Gordon Gekko with a beard. That's a very good point. And that's the thing. I think that's why there's so much of that sort of leftover, even in the new version of the dwarves that are good.
He does try and rehabilitate that a little bit when we get to Gimli, doesn't he?
Yes, he does.
I mean, think about what Gimli says about the Glittering Caves. That, they wouldn't go in there and plunder it.
No.
They would go in
like a garden.
Tiny taps. Yes.
Maybe over the course of a century to make this place. Yeah. And I think that's the thing. Maybe it's fair to say that there is a cultural tendency towards that, and that a dwarf has to fight a little harder than somebody else to overcome that tendency to greed. I don't know if that feels like third age dwarves in the final version, but we know that they don't always succeed. I mean, all the hordes of the dwarf lords were founded on a ring that made it worse. But that's the other thing. Like, okay, are they greedy inherently?
Or were they affected by the ring? Is a lot of this actually the effect of the rings?
Exactly.
Because, the rings are clearly amplifying certain character traits that are in there. But it doesn't mean that those dwarves are inherently just greedy and materialistic.
It means there's a tendency in there because the ring is capitalizing on it. If they weren't greedy at all, then it would capitalize on some other thing.
Right.
So it's there.
Yes, it's there, but it's not everything that they are, right. I think that would be just too stereotyping. I don't think that would be right at all.
No.
And when it comes to Thráin Oakenshield, when he's denying the people a share of Smaug's gold hoard.
The dragon sickness.
It's because he has succumbed to dragon sickness. It's not because he himself is an evil, materialistic bad guy.
No.
It's not that. It's
clearly not.
It's that.
Given what he says on his deathbed, he's recognizing that the condition he was in earlier was the wrong condition.
Right.
And he's renouncing that materialism. Yeah.
Yes. So I think that there certainly in the early days of creating the dwarves, I think Tolkien was leaning into that stereotype a little bit, but I think he moved away from it the further into his writing he got.
I think so too.
And I think that's a good thing, because otherwise they would be very two-dimensional.
They would. I mean, the villain dwarves of the early writings were very two-dimensional. Mm-hmm. And I like what we have now, the rich, complex history, the dwarves and elves. I like that there's still a challenge of it, right? I mean, you think about the dwarves that killed Thingol, a combination of pride and greed there, certainly. So But, the truth is we can all fall into greed. So
that is true.
Good stuff. Great question. Great discussion. I'm sure we'll talk more about that in a couple of weeks when we dive into those early years of the Dwarven writings and Peoples of Middle-earth.
Indeed.
But for now, folks, that does wrap it up for another episode of the Prancing Pony Podcast. Please be sure to come back next week when the tale continues with Thráin and the Ring.
Now, Alan and I want to thank the members of Team PPP, editor Jordan Rannells, Barleyman Becca Davis, social media manager Casey Hilsey, event and Patreon community coordinator Katie McKenna, graphic artist Megan Collins, and website guru Phil Dean.
And please take a minute to check out theprancingponypodcast.com. That's where you're going to find show notes, outtakes, Prancing Pony ponderings, and our online storefront where you can get PPP merch featuring all of the incredible episode artwork that Megan's been doing for the show since the start of Season 7.
Wow. And you'll also want to visit our library page because the Prancing Pony Podcast is, after all, a podcast about the books. So if you're interested in a book we've mentioned on the show, you'll find a link for it in our library. And we do get a small amount of compensation when you make your purchase. We thank you for that.
Indeed, we do. We also want to thank our patrons at the Círdan's contribution tier. I'll start with Demay in Alaska, Chad in Texas, Lance in New Jersey, Joseph in Michigan, Kathy from North Carolina, Carlos in California, Brian in the UK, Jerry from Washington, Joe in Washington, Erwin from the Netherlands, Ben in Minnesota, Anthony in Texas, Zaksu in Illinois, Sara in New Jersey, Joshua in Massachusetts, Lucy in Texas, Keith in Alabama, Erica in Texas, and Vivian in California.
And there's also James in Massachusetts, Anne in Kentucky, Sean in New Jersey, Mason in California, Maureen from Massachusetts, Olivia in London, Robert in Arizona, Nick in Wisconsin, Lewis in South Carolina, Thomas in Germany, Craig in California, Bailey in Texas, Kevin in Massachusetts, Julie in Washington, Bruce in California, Joe in Maryland, Nathan in Arizona, and Kevin in Pennsylvania. Thank you all so very much for your support.
Indeed, thank you.
Now make sure you don't miss any episodes of the Prancing Pony Podcast. Subscribe now through Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or your favorite podcast app.
And one last thing as always, don't forget to send your thoughts, comments, and most of all, bigger hands to hold all this victory to Barleyman at theprancingponypodcast.com.
And if you want your voice literally heard, well, just send us audio of your question. Visit podinbox.com/prancingponypod and record your question for us. Now, please be sure to still email the question to Barleyman, though.
That's right. Now, even though Barleyman's been a lot more reliable lately, there's still a lot of mail to sort through. We'll try to get to you just as soon as we're able. As always, though, this has been far too short a time to spend among such excellent and admirable listeners. But until next time.
Halvar. Farewell, folks.